Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. So today we're talking about coffee, all about whether it is good for you, whether it's bad for you. We're going to dive into this question a bit more deeply and hopefully clear some confusion around coffee.
So coffee tends to get a bit of a bad rap in the health and wellness community. So we hear a lot of things thrown around about coffee that it's toxic and that nobody should be drinking it. But today what we wanted to do was really give a balanced take on coffee. So looking at some of the pros, and there are actually quite a lot of pros to drinking coffee, as well as the cons, so that we can help you guys decide whether coffee is for you and whether it's good for your body.
So before we get started, we wanted to make it really clear that we are talking about coffee today. We're not talking about our big milky coffees filled with sugar and other flavors and things like that. So we're not talking about your big Starbucks lattes or anything like that. We're talking about coffee in its purest form. So we're talking black coffee or perhaps almond milk, but we'll speak in a little more detail about how we drink our coffee later in the video. But we just want to make that clear.
So the first pro of coffee is that it is packed full of antioxidant polyphenols. So we know how good antioxidants are in our diet, and coffee is just like any other kind of plant. You know, sometimes we think that coffee is like this toxic
This other thing, isn't it?
But it really is, at the end of the day, it's a plant. So you've got things like tea, it's very similar.
And I've also heard that the antioxidants in coffee can be stronger than teas, even things like your green tea, which get, you know, a really positive spin from the health community, which doesn't seem to confer to coffee, but coffee does in fact have just as many antioxidants. So the second pro for coffee is that it has been linked to some strong anti-inflammatory effects. Now, in certain studies, and these even used high amounts of coffee, so between 3 to 5 cups, I believe, of coffee per day, were conferring anti-inflammatory effects. So it stimulated certain pathways in the body that reduced inflammation, and this saw decreased levels of mortality from all different causes, whether that was Alzheimer's, like stroke, and even certain cancers. So we know that inflammation drives so many of our chronic diseases in this modern day. So foods and practices and activities that can decrease our inflammation are really important for our health. So our third pro for coffee is that it actually feeds our good bacteria in our gut. So we've spoken in plenty of videos before about the importance of our gut microbiome in promoting our overall health, whether that's our energy levels, our skin, how we feel day to day. It just underpins our whole vitality. So coffee, actually, the polyphenols, which we spoke about in our first point, feed certain strains of beneficial bacteria. And this is really important because what you feed in your gut is what populates. So we want to have that good diversity of bacteria that work with our body. So the more foods that you eat that feed good bacteria, the better, and the less of the foods which feed different fungi like candida or pathogenic bacteria, better. So
it's actually interesting because the culture that we live in today, you know, people are living on things like refined breads and all of these different refined carbohydrates that feed a lot of opportunistic bacteria, as you're saying. In that case, coffee is almost the best thing that you're having in your diet, you know? It's got all those
for many people, in a funny way, the coffee that they're having is one good thing for them. There may be some reasons that we'll go into later where it may not be serving them, but in terms of the gut diversity and feeding good bacteria, coffee has some definite pros. And it's also said to actually help weed out some certain pathogenic types of bacteria. So it's helping the good ones and killing the bad ones.
So now we're on to the cons. So the first con that most people are familiar with coffee is obviously that it contains caffeine, which can stimulate our adrenals to produce stress hormones. So this is particularly bad if we're already stressed, so we have this chronic ongoing stress, and then we're adding coffee on top of that. So it's going to be stimulating the release of stress hormones like cortisol, which can also interfere with our cortisol rhythm. So we know that cortisol is high during the morning to wake us up, and then it's low at night when we're going to sleep.
When we're functioning.
So if we're overstimulating our adrenals to produce more and more cortisol, we can end up with adrenal fatigue. So this is when our cortisol gets thrown off, and so we end up with things like we're waking up feeling really tired because our cortisol isn't peaking at the right times. So If you suspect that you are suffering from some level of adrenal fatigue or you're feeling a bit stressed out, coffee might be something that you want to hold up on for a bit.
Yeah, and like Amy said, a good hint that that's the case is that you find it really hard to get up in the morning, even if you've had a long sleep. And the other thing is you can also feel really wired at bedtime because your cortisol rhythm is off, and at night it's actually higher than it's meant to be. So if that's you, then maybe coffee is something that you could reduce or take out for a period of time. So the other con around coffee that also relates to stress is that when we exacerbate our body's stress and stress response, we can also increase the depletion of certain minerals in the body. So things like our magnesium, potassium, sodium can all be excreted more quickly from our bodies, and then we can run low. So you can quickly really push yourself into a state of being quite depleted. And obviously these minerals, they play a really important role in so many chemical reactions and processes in our bodies. So under stress we can excrete them quite quickly as it is, let alone with additional caffeine stressing us even further.
So our next con, which is kind of related to our first point, is that when we have coffee and caffeine, this drives up our cortisol, and cortisol then spikes our blood sugar. So this can cause blood sugar imbalances for people that struggle with having stable blood sugar levels. And this is particularly a problem if you experience things like anxiety or you're prone to panic attacks.
Coffee can make it much worse if you suffer from things like that. And our final point, which is a con about coffee, is that certain people can develop cross-reactivities to coffee when they're also sensitive to gluten and sometimes even dairy. So if you suspect that maybe you have a sensitivity developed towards coffee, you could always get that tested with your naturopath or a functional medicine practitioner. So that's sort of a con, but only for, I guess, certain people, as are all the cons really. So now we're moving on to some tips around how to enjoy coffee and how we like to drink our coffee. So our first point is that we like to drink our coffee black and without sugar. Now it may take a little while to get used to a strong flavour of coffee without any milk or
That's what some
sweetness.
people realise, I think, when they start drinking black coffee. They realise that they actually don't like coffee, they like milk.
Milk and sugar. But you do develop an appreciation for that nice full-bodied flavour of coffee itself. So I will mention though, on occasion we do like to use almond milk, so sometimes we would have an almond milk flat white or even an almond milk cappuccino.
So our next point is around the quality of your coffee. So in particular, if you're going for decaf. So decaf is not necessarily going to be better because we know that the process of making decaf coffee, we're using a lot of really harsh solvents, and at the end of the day, it is quite processed. Aside from that, we also want to be looking for really fresh, well-made coffee, so not your instant.
And coffee is also quite prone to mold, so you want to use fresh beans that are being freshly ground at your coffee shop, or if you make it at home, you can grind your beans at home. So it's actually better to buy a small batch rather than to buy in bulk and leave it in your cupboard to collect mold and go bad. So the other point is that you want to drink your coffee in a good quality cup. So you don't want to drink it from a takeaway cup which is lined with plastic. See, these are filled with things like BPA and phthalates, and even a BPA-free plastic is not ideal. It's got other things in there. It's not just bisphenol A. You know, the right legal proceedings have happened in order for bisphenol A to be in the spotlight, if that makes sense.
Very similar compounds that...
There are many similar compounds also in these plastics which just haven't been, I suppose, targeted through the legal process as yet. So when you're drinking takeaway coffee in that plastic lined cup, it actually leaches out BPA with the heat of the coffee. And we know that BPA and other phthalates are known endocrine disruptors, so they disrupt our hormones in our body. And I believe they can also change our epigenetics and can be passed on to our children. So we don't know the effects of these epigenetic changes at this time, but it's kind of scary if you think about it.
And aside from that, we just don't want to be using plastic cups because it's so bad for the environment, you know? Every single one of those cups that we're using is just ending up in landfill. And for people that are having multiple cups of coffee out every day, you just have to think about the impact of that on the environment.
Yeah, and so a good option is to use a glass keep cup that you take to your coffee shop, or if you're having it dine in, then obviously you have it in a proper cup. And if you're having it at home, obviously don't use a throwaway cup.
And if you find that you're someone that's very sensitive to caffeine, so you get the jitters or the shakes, you also want to make sure that when you're drinking your coffee that you're not having it on an empty stomach. So we know that when we have coffee with food, it's going to slow down the absorption of that caffeine and it's not going to be such a big hit.
And our last point on drinking coffee is that if you're sensitive to caffeine and you feel it keeps you up at night, is to make sure that you have your last coffee before 2 p.m. So coffee takes a certain amount of time to be broken down by our liver, and it varies from person to person, and I think a lot of it has to do with genetics, but we all have a different metabolic rate when it comes to breaking down coffee, and it's said that the average is around up to 8 hours. So if you have your coffee before 2 p.m, that leaves you plenty of time before you want to start winding down in the evening.
So now we have a few tips for if you're trying to give up coffee or reduce your intake. So our first tip would be not to cut it out cold turkey, especially if you're drinking a lot of coffee at the moment. So you just want to slowly reduce your number, because when you cut out coffee altogether, you're going to have some intense withdrawal symptoms. So we're talking headaches and things like that. So you also don't want to be replacing it with other beverages that are high in caffeine as well. So often people go to black tea next, but black tea is actually quite high in caffeine also. And even green tea does have caffeine as well. So you really want to be opting for something that is caffeine free. So that's going to be herbal tea. So there's a lot of different options of herbal teas, but we in particular like ones that are quite intense. So ones that have those real bitter herbs in them.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention as well that we're suggesting some alternatives, not because we say it's bad to drink coffee. Obviously there's heaps of really significant benefits to drinking coffee, but I think all of us go through stages of feeling that we've already got enough stress on our plate, we've already got enough cortisol and adrenaline pumping through our veins, so it's like a good opportunity now and again to just recalibrate, take it down or take it out, but it is good to have some substitutes on hand when that's the case. But yeah, I really like the stronger, more bitter flavoured teas, because when you get used to drinking your coffee black, I think herbal water just ain't gonna do it. At least for me in particular, I really like, what are the ingredients that make it so bitter? It's like
the bitter compounds in the herbs. So a lot of herbs are considered, you know, bitter herbs. So you've got things like andrographis and dandelion as well as a really popular substitute.
And they're also, the benefit of those is that they help your digestion. So they're great to have, I think, really either before or after meals. So we'll link down below one of our favourites. It's not for everyone, it's quite intense, but if you're looking for a coffee substitute that isn't so florally or fruity, you might be interested in trying this one out. Alright guys, so that wraps up this video. We hope that it really helped to shed some light on coffee and clear any confusion that you may have had around drinking coffee. So if you have any questions for us about coffee, then please leave them in the comments below. We try to answer as many of the comments as possible. And otherwise, if you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed, then hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in our next video. Bye guys!